Hello everyone. My name is Briju Thangachan. I am currently serving as the Executive Director of EdTech Society. It's an honor to be with you all this evening for the Masterclass 21. So we'll be sharing more about the Masterclass later, and also we will introduce the speaker. So, but before that, I just want to let you know about the EdTech Society. It's a non-profit organization. The main goal is to create a public forum between the educators and the researchers who are in the field of educational technology. So we do offer several events throughout the year, and Masterclass, it's one of the key event that we offer every month. And also we do conduct the in-focus interview, panel sessions, and different sessions. So please check our YouTube channel so you can find all our past videos and events, recorded sessions. You can find it in our YouTube channel. And also check our social media channel, especially the LinkedIn page. So we do update lot of information in our LinkedIn page as well. Yeah, if you have any questions, please put it in the chat session, the comment section in the YouTube session itself, and the relevant questions we will post it we will address those questions at the end, or sometimes during the session as well. Okay, so before further ado, let me introduce our speaker today. So welcome, Jonathan. Jonathan, thank you, Jonathan, for accepting our invitation and sharing your expertise on, the education, different aspects of education scaling. And we are eagerly looking forward to hear from you. So a brief bio about Jonathan. Jonathan Mendonca is the head of scale of Shikha Institute of Education and co-founder of Barefoot Ed Foundation, a non-profit that builds school leadership for the 21st century. Over 150,000 schools in India. He also holds a degree in international education policy from Harvard Graduate School of Education and was awarded the New World Social Innovation Fellowship by the Harvard Kennedy School for his efforts toward systemic social change. Thank you very much, Jonathan, for joining today. So we are going to hear, for today's topic, it's about scaling education through people, product, and organization. So we are eager to hear from you. Jonathan, the stage is yours. Thank you again.
Oh, thanks so much for the introduction, and thank you for the invitation. Could we share my slides? Perfect. So when I was invited here to speak about scale, I gave a little thought to the topic, and I realized it's an incredibly broad topic. Also, there is a lot of information about scaling an organization or scaling products available on the internet. So I'm going to make use of this masterclass to talk purely about experience and a perspective that I've built over many years. Since this is not a workshop, we'll discuss a bunch of instances and dimensions to think about with respect to scaling, and then we will take a bunch of questions. I encourage you to ask as many questions in the chat as possible, because that would help make this a little more interactive in terms of letting me know what are the pressing questions in your mind, and hopefully I'll be able to address them. So to begin, briefly walking through what the session is going to be about, we're going to cover a multidimensional approach to scaling educational programs. We will also learn about how to think about education in terms of either a product or a service. And we'll learn how to apply the lens of people, product or service, and organization to education ecosystems. And the reason for doing this is that we break up what we think about scaling into these different elements and perspectives and look at how the entire ecosystem can help us scale rather than how we have to make way and clear spaces in order to make ourselves relevant. And finally, if time permits, we'll go through a brief framework to think about what the work that we're doing and how we can possibly scale that. I do know that whenever people talk about best practices or scaling, a lot of people tend to say it was different in their time, or that won't work in my context. And sure, that works here, but things are different. And while that's very, 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 very true, it doesn't mean that we cannot learn from these experiences, right? So first, I'm going to frame my session. I'm going to ask all of y'all to think about this mango season that just passed us. Think specifically about the first fruit or the first mango that we had, and what were the thoughts that went through your mind. Like personally, I remember eating the first mango of every season and just going, wow. Like one of my friends even told me that he started believing in God after eating a mango. It was that much of joy that got brought to him. But did anyone think for a second, how can I grow this mango in my backyard? Would it grow in Finland? No, we just enjoyed it. And that's what I want to point out. In order to start thinking about scale, we first need to just take in a good practice. We need to enjoy that it exists. We need to be shaped by it and even inspired by it. And then once we've identified something worth scaling, we then need to think about contextualizing it, or what are the parameters that made it scale in the first place. But just like the mango, first, we got to just enjoy it. So setting the context about this phrase that people use, things in the education sector are very difficult to scale. Let's put that thought aside for a second, and let's think about the many things that have scaled, like the education sector itself. It grew massively in size. Around 200 years ago in the 1800s, there were just about 20% of the world's population, which was around 1 billion at that time, that had any kind of formal experience with education. Now, even though our population's grown to 8 billion, we have more than 80% of the world having experienced some kind of formal education. That's a huge, huge amount, from 20 million to 5.6 billion. So if the sector itself can grow at this rate, then why can't interventions within the sector also grow? Not too long ago, sports in any form was not part of the education system. It's why sports are still referred to as co-curricular activities. But what made something like sports and education scale? For one, it satisfied the needs of everyone who was a part of the system. Children needed an outlet to vent. Sports let them do that. Teachers needed a break to let students vent. Sports allowed them to do that. It also freed up certain time in the school for people to participate. And it was something very visual. And to be honest, nothing captures joy in a school more than watching children run around in a playground, right? And it's these small things which we need to keep in mind as we think about what we're trying to scale in the first place. It should not be a push, a tremendous push from our end, but it should find a space that allows people to celebrate it and adopt it, or contextualize it for themselves. If we look at something as mundane as textbooks, right? Textbooks never used to be in the hands of students, and in fact, that's why a blackboard exists in school in the first place. But if we think about the scale of India, 270 million children, if we spend just $10 per child on books, how much do you think it would cost? It would cost India more than the entire GDP of Lesotho or Seychelles or Grenada. But yet we have textbooks which are in the hands of most children. And this has not only created a space where books can be printed and provided, it's created a space for hundreds of publishers and built an entire ecosystem around that. More than 45.7 lakh students in Delhi now participate in the happiness curriculum. Uttarakhand and other states have followed suit quite quickly. If we look at technology startups like Magic School AI, they have almost 2 million active users just in a matter of months. And if we look at organizations like Hippocampus, many people around the country have tried to set up self-sustaining preschools, but Hippocampus has been successful at setting up more than 55 community-led self-sustaining preschools for low-income communities. Now, while 55 may seem like a small number in front of everything else that I just mentioned, It is incredibly important to realize that this is a difficult feat. And it also raises the question about letting us think about what is scale in our context. Is scale 55 or 100 or 10,000 or a million? Or is it something even much bigger? While Byju's reminded us that gravity exists, they were able to proliferate to quite a large number, and there are some things that we can learn from them. Convergenius has over 150 million children using their products in some way or the other. That's 55% of the school going population. So let's take a second to just think about what is scale in your context. Everyone does not need to chase the largest number that exists, but needs to chase a number that is meaningful to you in your particular context. So, kicking off the session, the people component of it. If we follow the global education movement over the past 200 years, we get some unique insights on how education was able to scale in the first place. Back then, when the population was significantly less, to now, where our population is 8 billion, um, think about how we could have reached so many people. And no doubt quality is in question, but for the sake of this conversation, let's focus on the access to formal education that has been created globally. Right? When we think of this, usually what comes to people's mind is schools that popped up that were able to, the number of schools grew rapidly, and because number of schools grew rapidly, that's how education spread. But that's not entirely what happened. Formal schools, the way that we know it, didn't really exist back then. In the 1800s, the predominant way to get educated was through a private tutor. And when the question about advancing education to also advance human rights started to become a part of the conversation, in order to think about scaling this private tutor system, schools were schools as we know it was created. And big schools were conceived in this way, thinking that okay, a private tutor can teach 1 to 5 students. So how can we get a teacher to teach 100 students? And if they teach batches of 20 and move through 5 classes during the day, that one teacher has impacted 100 students. And thus the schooling system that we know of was created. So schools popped up in order to scale something, and the entire nature of education changed in that way. So, according to you, is school a product or a service or both? Think about it. We'll get to that, but it's not the genius of school design that makes over 90% of India attend schools. Parents or some adult wakes up children, some even give them breakfast. Families earn to provide for their children so that they can get the nourishment and the resources to go to school in the first place. A community of kids or people or the bus driver helps the children get to school. Teachers evangelize education. In fact, teachers dedicate their entire lives to this thing called a school. So schools that also roll out government systems and schemes to families, right, are an entire ecosystem. And we need to start thinking about school not as a product that proliferated, but as a huge bunch of people that got together in order to make this thing that we call a school successful. This really puts people into the forefront of the conversation about how do products or services scale. The Beckard-Harris change equation played an important role in how I think about scale in particular. And addressing people as part of this whole process, the change equation says that for any change to happen, there's some resistance that takes place. People inherently don't want to change unless there are these 3 factors. One is dissatisfaction. Someone needs to be dissatisfied with the current state of events. The next is vision. They must be able to conceive of where they want to go. And the third are first steps to begin this journey of going to their vision. Now, what happens when things exist in isolation? If there's just dissatisfaction in people, it tends to pull you down and make you feel a little low because you know that something needs to change, but you're not able to visualize what exactly has to change or how it has to change. And you'll find that the moment you start thinking about the entire education system, this dissatisfaction takes precedence, and it tends to lead to the next step, vision. You start to wonder, what are these massive changes that I can make in order to fix everything? And it gets overwhelming. It's kind of why not too many people take up leadership positions in the education sector. It's because it's overwhelming and you need a different kind of substance or metal to power through that. But what makes all of this easier is, while you're dissatisfied with the problem, while you're able to see the direction in which you want to go for change to take place, just identifying the first steps kicks you off on that journey. This is where everyone enters the product design or the service design space, where they start thinking of, okay, how do I begin? And eventually we'll look at much larger challenges and things like that. But beginning is incredibly important. And now let's think of the different people who are involved and where they lie. Why it's important to think about this is because your customers totally depend on your kind of product or service, or or the challenge that you're addressing. If they are in the dissatisfaction stage, you need to then help them with the other aspects, right? But everyone talks about us obsessing about customers. Why do they keep saying that? It's because despite saying this again and again, people for some reason refuse to talk to the customers. People talk a lot about crowdsourcing solutions from teachers, from educators, and from the grassroots. But how many people crowdsource the problem statement itself? How many start off with a blank slate and try to get the problem statement identified from the sector before they start working on it? After you've already begun, that's a little late to start talking to customers. Nevertheless, still important, but a little late compared to speaking to them to validate the problem in the first place. On a consultancy that I did with a foreign state government, the problem, it was a perfect example to point out how the problem statement can be limiting in the way we think about a solution. So this was during COVID, and their problem statement said that schools are unable to provide adequate support to students during COVID. Now, by putting the word schools into the problem statement, we're already talking about a solution. And yeah, schools is this important thing because we've invested so much of time and effort and money into it. But in the event where schools are breaking down during COVID or are no longer able to provide that support, it would make sense to rewrite that problem statement and say, students are not receiving enough support in education during COVID. And then that answer as to who should be the provider of that support system tends to broaden quite a bit. It could be schools, it could be parents, it could be community members, it could be nonprofits, it could literally be anyone, right? And that's just an example of how rethinking the problem statement with your customer plays a huge role in whether you'll be able to scale in the first place or not. If we stuck to that and we continue to try to drive the way that schools were providing support, it would be putting a lot of pressure on the school, and we would not have been able to scale our solution. The second set of people who you need to think about is your team, because there is no such thing as a good idea which did not get implemented. An idea which cannot be implemented is, in fact, a pretty bad idea most of the time, right? And as you create something, either your product or your service, and you take it to market, you will realize that production, if you're in the manufacturing space, or implementation, if you're in the service space, or a mix of both, are the biggest impediments to scale, and both require a very, very effective team. This is why companies that are valued too high in the early days, they're forced into scale before they get a chance to build a truly strong and reliable team. And that team that grows rapidly tends not to encapsulate the culture or the ethos by which the programs were designed in the first place. So, as thinking about your team, you also need to think about different profiles. When we started Barefoot a long time ago, we only hired people who had this huge entrepreneurial drive because we had that drive too, and we thought that they would make the perfect team, and they did. They made a pretty brilliant team. But since everyone had the entrepreneurial drive, we landed up with a lot of self-driven initiatives. And then that prompted us to realize, okay, we need something to connect these self-driven initiatives, ratify it against our vision, and see whether either our vision needs to expand or whether these initiatives need to tweak a little to fit within the agenda of the organization in the first place, right? We realize that there need to be people who also don't are not driven by constant change and like a certain amount of stability, because they're the ones that carry forth the culture and the systems, okay, as others learn and grow and in fact leave the organization. So question that I get asked quite often is, what is a good attrition rate in an organization? And honestly, there's no exact answer to this. There's no right answer. It could be literally anything, but zero is the wrong answer. Because if your organization has zero attrition over time, it means it's indicative of a lot of things. One, that your organization is not encouraging people to grow at a faster rate than your organization. And typically that should happen because individual growth can change and adapt at a lot quicker rate than the way that the entire organization expands. You also need people to feel growth, and when you really believe in your team that way, it changes the way that we think about our product, right? We let people who come into the organization for sprints leave some imprint of theirs behind in the organization or the product or the service, and we let people who are there for the long marathon also think about how they can become part of the organization and embed their values and culture into the organization in the first place. The third is this category of other influencers. And this could be educators or governments or anyone who you should partner with. And it's very tempting to partner with people in the early stages of the organization. So this is a call to say, before partnering with someone, by all means partner. This is one of the values that I live by. But while partnering, think about who else exists in this ecosystem who wants you to succeed, and they want you to succeed because by you succeeding you open up more opportunities for them in the first place, or you help them achieve an agenda. And this could really be a government that is motivated and wanting to drive something like foundational literacy and numeracy, or it may be an organization that is really waiting to roll out a certain intervention, but until you get those digital devices to those kids, they would not be able to roll that out in the first place, right? But what I've learned in terms of getting partnerships with state governments or anything at a large scale, it's not you who needs to be in the forefront talking about yourself, but there needs to be people who already have some kind of connection to that system, who can validate both to the third party and to you that you're a cultural fit for that particular space. And lastly, this cannot be understated more, but please, please, please build your support system. If now at the beginning stage of your organization, you don't have time to spend with your friends or family or have meaningful conversations with your mentors, it's not going to happen later. Because as you scale, the things that you do in your early stages tend up end up being a huge influencing factor later on. So if you make sure to get this meaningful time and support in the first place, as you scale, that will also continue. But the thing about getting this creating the support system early on is that when you're on a high in the product or service space, it's great. But when you're on a low, that is not the time to create context, to speak to people, let them know your whole journey and what led to this point. You need someone who's there for you at that particular moment. There was a project that we worked on where we had hired an entire team, and the funder decided to reallocate funds during COVID, and we were left with this team that suddenly didn't have funding. And it was one of our mentors who runs another organization who offered to let our team work on a project for them. And the only reason why this could happen is because of the relationship we had in the first place, right? So your support system is meant to be a safety net, and do not neglect it. With that, we'll move on to the second component, which is thinking about scale from the lens of products and services, right? Where does your offer lie with respect to this Descartes Harris change equation? And it's important to think about this because if you are trying to create dissatisfaction, then you become an awareness organization, right? You're a demand creating organization. And the way you got to think about scale is completely different from if you're an aspirational organization, right? Once setting vision, these MBA programs, or how do you become a better principal, or how do you become a better teacher, for people who already have the dissatisfaction, they would become your market to then put the vision onto it in the first place. And for those who have vision and dissatisfaction, they become your target for an organization that's bringing the first steps, like a parent support app, right? I definitely want the best for my child. I have this vision. I am dissatisfied with the current education system, and a product that shows me the first steps. What do I do with my child today and tomorrow? Not 5 years down the line, not college, not a job, but what do I do with my child today? That's a good example of an organization working on first steps for the parent. So even though our product or service is built sans customer, the nature of who our target group is deeply impacts what we're building in the first place. So through this section, we're going to think about how different products and services can scale, and the fact that if you had a Lego tower, right, and you wanted to build, you built this tower, now you want to build more such towers, you want to scale this tower that you've done in terms of number. What do? You create blueprints or plans about how to make this, you distribute it to other kids or peers, encourage them to make it, and you scale the number of towers that exist, right? But if you want to scale this tower in size, what do? You add more blocks, you add more components, you perhaps create a stronger base, a much wider base, so that it's able to root itself into the ground, right? So you have products and services that are like these Lego towers that expand in number or expand in size, and we can think about that relatively linearly. Does your product lie in this space? And when I say product or service, I'm using the terms interchangeably just in the interest of conversation. But now think of a brick arch. If your product is like a brick arch, how do you make a bigger arch? You can't just add to this, because the moment you take out one brick, any brick, especially the keystone, your entire tower will collapse. So you need to rebuild the arch from scratch. You need to create supporting structures or scaffolding. And this is what happens with complexity, right? The more complex something is, you can't keep adding, because then all these layers form on top of it. They have past context. People need to go very deep into a product, which is why sometimes organizations, when they get too big or when a product has too many features, they find it difficult to pivot. And they also find it difficult to onboard new customers in the first place, because there's too much context. Some customers have gone through that journey as one more feature kept getting added, but other customers have not gone through that journey and just see something that's way too complicated to participate in. An example of scaling something like a brick arch is the education system itself. Schools were created to replace tutors at a large scale and scale the education system in a new way. But by virtue of doing that, the schools created a larger market for private tutors as well, because these private tutors now, instead of teaching what the school taught, got to teach something a little beyond or a little deeper, and in fact help children prepare for this thing that the school called the board exam. Right? So when we look at scaling complex systems, we end up building other ecosystems around us, and all of these different players are our friends. So they are the ones that is super important to partner with in the first place. So thinking about whether your product or your offering is like the tower or the arch, we need to differentiate it into two categories, because both of them scale very differently. So first, think about whether your offering solves a problem, or whether your offering supports the ability of people to solve a problem. Right? They're very different. So the products that solve problems, they address a particular pain point. Like take Byju's or Physics Wala. They've both been able to reach a considerable amount of scale, raise considerable amount of funds, we directly solve the problem, right? Preparing your child for standardized exams. And yes, I've been reductionist in the way that I describe their problem statement, but bear with me. Products, on the other hand, that support the ability to solve problems, those enable people. Those become support tools for teachers or support tools for other educators, and does not look to replace anyone. It does not look to work directly with your final stakeholder, but through someone else. And take Khan Academy, for instance. While children can work directly with Khan Academy, a lot of schools use the content of Khan Academy to help teaching become a little bit better. Right? So Khan Academy is an enabler in the sector. Or take Kahoot, for instance. In it enables the teacher to conduct more effective assessments in the class. And in this process, by enabling the teacher to conduct assessments in the class, the teacher brings more students onto the platform. And that's how an organization that enables scale. To put all of this in a tangible perspective, to move a little bit away from philosophy and these individual points, um, we'll talk about a case study of a program that I designed during my first year at Harvard. It's an incubator for school principals called Renuma. Now, what this program did is it takes in 20 principals per year, and we work with these principals of low fee low affordable private schools to utilize local resources and drive innovation in schools rapidly. While doing this, the solutions and the problem statements are both got from the principals in the first place. The principals identify what is important to them, and they work with our incubator, undergo a few sessions, work with the school coach, and try to conceive of simple, easy to implement solutions that could address that problem. What the incubator does is it helps build a resilient organizational structure around those solutions so that they stick in the school and become a little more permanent. So now when we face the question of how do you scale a, a program like Renuma, right? Renuma is an enablement solution. It enables principals to be problem solvers, right? But the product that we offer that is solving a particular problem are our independent workshops. So you can have product A, B, C that are all nested within each other, and each of them can function differently. So our workshops were helping people solving problems, while the school coach was helping the principal develop the ability to solve problems for themselves. So when we started to think about scale, the most important part of the program was the school coach. There are approximately 1 lakh schools in Maharashtra, or around, let's say, 10,000 schools in Bombay. So if we were to work with so many schools, we would need to hire nearly 2,000 people to be coaches to these schools, which is not practical. So for us, scale did not mean getting new principals on board, but it meant that we're going to keep the Renuma program fixed to 20 principals per year. And we're going to grow a number by taking 20 principals each year. But on the other hand, what we will scale is this ability to be a coach to a school principal. And we created a program called Renuma X. So Renuma X is a school coach certification program that helps people who go to school. You may work with an organization or independently, but if you go to a school physically and if you interact with a principal, you can undergo our program and become certified to be a school coach, and then create any form of Renuma on your own, right? It doesn't even have to be similar. It's empowering you to be able to support a principal make change for themselves in school. And now that you have product A and B, right, which is Renuma and Renuma X, all of these end up surfacing best practices that are sustainable and easy to implement because they've been conceived of by the principal in the first place. Very little capacity building has been required in this whole process with respect to the final solution. So now we learn from this and we set up project management units in the government at a state level that help take our learnings from these and see whether any of these learnings can help the government address points that are on their agenda. For instance, if one wants to drive foundational literacy and numeracy, or one wants to improve attendance in schools, we can see that how one of the principles in our program to increase attendance in school just asked parents, what time should I start school? And if the answer may change from 8 a.m. to 8:30 a.m. because it coincides with the work time of the parents, and that itself can be very effective to increase attendance in schools. So these are ways in which we can think about looking at different components of the program scaling or the value of the program scaling while the program itself stays just the same size. This section talks about iterating our products and services. So there is this big myth that once you plan something, it will get implemented, especially in the education sector. If it involves as many people, right, the moment you have any kind of complexity, it's going to be shaped by the market. And all good products or services should be shaped by the market, not to drop quality, to improve quality, but shaping for the better, right? So let's do a simple thought experiment. Instead, take person A, who spends 1 year working behind closed doors, developing a product. And then think about person B, who just starts off, right? Has a very nascent idea of what's going about and takes it to the market, and according to atomic habits, improves 1% every day. Over a period of 1 year, person B, who took their product to the market and iterated by 1% every day, their product becomes 37 times better than person A's product. 37 times, not 37%, right? But if we're a little more realistic, we're not going to iterate every day, right? Let's say we iterate only once a week and we improve our product by 5% every week. By the end of our year, our product would still be 12 times better than the person A who developed their product for that same year behind closed doors. And I think the best example about this is COVID. COVID is something that nobody wanted, but it still scaled tremendously. And that's because it kept iterating. If COVID stayed as severe as it was, people would have stayed indoors and the virus eventually would have passed. But with every iteration, it did not become stronger or bolder. It became something milder that could coexist. And as we think about scale, it's really important to not think that improvement means something bigger or bolder, but improvement could mean something simpler or something that just slips into the lives of people and coexists with them. We'll finally move on to the third part about scaling organizations or building organizations about your product and service, right? To frame what is the difference between an organization and a movement, let's think of the Constitution of India. That's an example of a really good organization. It puts a ton of rules and processes in place. It is very clear as about what rights and duties citizens have, what can and can't be done, how someone's right, if it impinges on someone else's right, should definitely be flagged, etc. Right? But on the other hand, if you look at the non-cooperation movement or the Dandi March, over here, Gandhi never went to explain the details of democracy or freedom to people the way that the Constitution does. All he said was, don't cooperate. How? You decide in your own way. Decide what non-cooperation means for you. And we do all of this only towards a very broad, overarching goal, which is independence. Right? Building up on that, most organizations that do have a tight organizational structure have a specific goal. For instance, increase attendance, improve teaching in the classroom. And these come with a lot of systems and leaders who lead those systems or help propagate it. They also have incredibly clear intended outcomes. Okay? Most organizations function in this way. The problem lies that when people are building a movement, they tend to still function or operate the same way as that of the traditional organizational structure. And building a movement is very, very different. It looks like a goal that is broad and very simple. It looks like a space that has both leaders and followers. And this does not mean a huge hierarchy between them. You could have decentralized leaders at a lot of different places, all deciding what the movement would look like in their particular instance, just like the way we saw for the non cooperation movement. And an example of this could be that more teachers should enter the education system or the teaching profession. How do we increase community participation? And creating a movement in this instance, one with loose, broad goals and both intended and unintended outcomes, allows for people to shape community participation in a way that works well in their particular context, rather than trying to drive something that has been centrally decided. What this looks like in terms of an organization is that one should not look at growing their team or scaling their organization or scaling their product. They should think about what the primary purpose is. Do I want this thought to proliferate, or do I want this product to proliferate? And prioritize scaling impact or scaling your main goal. Don't prioritize scaling the product or your organization. If meeting that goal requires you to scale your organization or things like that, then so be it. Go for it, right? But in this process, when you think about what it is that you're truly trying to scale, then you can identify the people that also are would like to be part of the mission, who also are working on the same problem that you are, and you can find and leverage them without fear of uh, sharing credit or your idea getting stolen or anything like that. You just look at the entire sector in a completely different way. What this looks like in nature, and something I learned during the incubation period with Mantra for Change. um, Look at the set of birds on the left hand side. They're birds, a flock of birds flying in the V. They have a clear direction. You can look at them, you can tell where they're going. Everyone has their rules. Each bird knows who's going to take the forefront next, and they thrive. There's nothing wrong in this organizational structure. It works for a certain set of birds. But if you look at the murmuration on the right hand side, that is a flock of starlings, an insane number of starlings, and they're able to form these beautiful complex patterns. But they're able to do this only by having few rules. For instance, move towards food, move away from danger, and maintain minimum distance from each other. And if none of these three rules can get fulfilled, reorganize yourself in a way that you can work on fulfilling that. So each bird has total autonomy, and kind of the way in which most systems in India should function, like giving autonomy to the individual players so that we don't have to force contextualization, but people are able to do it for themselves and in their context. Now, we've thought about scaling educational offerings through the lens of people, products, and organizations. And yeah, it must be a lot of information in a lot of different situations. But one way to tie it all together is this very simple framework that I was introduced to by Mr. Sanjay Purohit a couple of years ago. Um, it helps take everything that I spoke about and put it together into a very clear plan. Right? It helps you reevaluate what exactly you're working on and who are the key players in the process. For instance, you start off with the for. Who are you working for? And the for does not have to always be children. You may be working to improve the educational ecosystem in totality. You may be working for teachers um, to be more valued. You may be working for any stakeholder, but be sure to call it out so that you then start to measure outcomes accordingly, and that everything that you do revolves around that, the for that you're working on in the first place. For the more nuance that you get, the better. For instance, instead of saying we're working for teachers, you can say we're working for motivated teachers to take a leap, right? Or we're working for demotivated teachers to get motivation. And the more nuanced you get, the better or the clearer picture that you have. The second layer is, who are you working with in order to reach your for. So you may be working with motivated teachers to build the capacity of not motivated teachers, right? So in that case, your with will be motivated teachers and your for will be demotivated teachers. You may be working with schools to reach those children or to reach teachers, right? So be really clear about who your key partners are going to be that help you deliver your product or your service, not partnering with at a very superficial level, but who are going to be the key drivers of your product, who is going to help you implement. The third is leveraging. Who else exists in the ecosystem who you can help co-create your product or service with? Are you going to work with specialized organizations to develop social emotional learning or gender specific lens in education, etc.? Or are you going to leverage incubators to reach many other organizations that are in the ed space in the first place? Right? Or are you going to leverage existing resources that exist so that you don't have to create your own and you can just speak to people about using that content or licensing fee? But leveraging existing content can save a tremendous amount of time in the sector. The next to the fourth level is, what are you as an organization enabled by in order to roll out your product or service? What infrastructure do you need to build? Do you need to build networks? Do you need to build digital infrastructure? Do you need to create books and textbooks or workshops? Or what exactly is your powerhouse? In one way, you could think about it, if someone were to purchase my organization, what would they tangibly be gaining? Would they be gaining a network? Would they be gaining some digital infrastructure? Would they be gaining the products that I have? And that helps you think about what infra you have created as an organization. You don't need to sell, it's just a thought experiment. And the final stage is, what powers you? What do you need to build in house? What does your team need to look like? What do your mentors need to look like? And what is that little bit of information that you need to have access to in order to make sure that all of this can be driven in effective ways? And just filling out these different categories helps take everything that I've spoken about and put it together on paper into a very tangible plan to say, this is what powers me, this is what my team's going to look like, this is the infrastructure that I'm going to build that enables me as an organization and helps my products and services proliferate. These are the people in the ecosystem who I will leverage in order to work with a certain career of people who will then help implement my product for a certain set of people. And that brings me to the end of my session. Happy to have more detailed conversations with anyone who wants to explore this further. You can hit me up on LinkedIn and we can definitely pursue a deeper conversation if it's something that interests you. If we have any questions that have come in the chat, this would be a good time to bring those up.
Great. Thank you, Jonathan. Yes, actually, can you hear me
We
now?
can hear you. Yeah.
Yes. Okay. So, so this is one of the. It was very interesting. I was just listening. Very interesting topic. So there is one question, as you can see from Aditi. So if you can address that question, would be great.
Sure. The question is, should organizations scale their solve problem product, or should they scale the ability to solve a problem from an education perspective, which yields better educational outcomes? So this is a fantastic, fantastic question, right? And it starts off by getting to know what you're doing in detail. If something that you're doing does not exist in the sector, then you need to scale your solve problem product until people get enough of exposure to it to then start creating those, right? If there is a definitive if there's something that you definitely know needs to happen, then you can start addressing that product. Right? If it does not need a lot of contextualization, that is something that you can also definitely scale. For instance, and an organization like Khan Academy, right? It still scales its content, and it relies on the sector itself to be advocates for them and proliferate their product. So while they are building for the ability to solve a problem, what they're doing is creating more and more content. And if we don't look at the expansion strategy, right, what they are doing is they are creating products that solve problems and putting that in the hands of people who are playing the role of problem solvers, right? Which is a fantastic blend of both. But if what you're working on requires contextualization, right? If it's not going to work in another instance, like strategies to motivate teachers, right? If you are a teacher motivational organization, your strategy definitely needs to change in different places, right? If you are working on child development, for instance, or in the early childhood education space, what part of your product you need to scale is a framework that stays relatively same across children, basic child development indicators. But then beyond that, we should ask people to contextualize ways to drive those indicators depending on their resources. So that's the point at which you reach this barrier that says contextualization is required for your product to be successful anymore. And that is the point at which you switch from problem solving to problem solving ability enabling.
Great. Thank you, Jonathan. There is another one more question from Srunika. How can this principle applied in academy, if at all?
Um, I I think the most if I had to pick one thing out of everything that I spoke about that should go to academia is definitely crowdsourcing the problem statements, because we tend to create a problem statement and then get out into the field to find different perspectives and solutions about that problem, and we may produce academic research that's brilliant but not relevant. But the moment we know for certain that the problem statement itself is something that a lot of people need, they will be your champions and supporters in the academic field, right? They will give you access to their schools to study because they know that whatever you work on is going to help them, right? They will give you unfettered access to their organizations because it's something that they want to know as well, but cannot spend the time on it when and know that you can do that too.
Okay, so there is another question from Kenneth. So if you can address that one.
So, with the question is, would like to know a little bit more about Renuma and the X version. What exactly is the offering? So, in what we offer are workshops, peer learning circles, and a school coach to principals in order to build their entrepreneurial ability. So, we ask them to forget about the fact that they're running a school and to think about that they're the CEO of an organization that is delivering the service of education, right? So then that lets you play with rules beyond the schooling system and drive innovation in your school by using local resources. What that looks like is five of our principals came together and took an entire building on rent and made that an activity center where children learn science and different activities. And this created a space for any intervening organization. If they wanted to intervene with a set of schools, they could go to that center and straight away interact with five schools as opposed to one, right? So they built this entire new way in which schooling takes place by private schools who people think would not want to work with each other, came, coming together to create a new form of schooling altogether. So that's what the Renuma version does. Now, the Renuma X version says out of these three paths, right? Workshops, school coaching, and peer learning circles, can we take that ability to coach a principal and train others in that? So we use all our learnings from the incubator Enema and we embed it into a set of workshops, peer learning circles, and coaches to these people who will go to school. And while the principal learns how to be more entrepreneurial in their approach, the school coach learns how to support a principal. And what this looks like is a person who went to the school came into the program saying, this principal does not want to build a library in the school, and I think it's so important because children need access to books, right? It prevents them from moving beyond the teacher if we don't have books in the school. And through the coaching program, she learned to value what the principal said. There might be some reason why they don't want a library in the school. Spoke to the principal and realized that the principal has a bunch of other principal friends who set up libraries in their school, and those libraries are never used. So his apprehension was that if we set up libraries, it's not going to be used. Now we have valuable information to use as a coach. Okay, so that's a fair point. It doesn't make sense setting up a library that's not going to be used. So can we tie up with an organization that sends someone to help us use the library? Or can we fundraise to get a budget for a librarian who is going to make sure that the library is actively used? Or can we do something to address this pain point? And if we can't, that's fine, because the principal has a valid concern, but we should not drive our agenda. Rather, we should outsource the problem statement to the principal and co-create the solutions with them.
Okay, great. Actually, I have a question regarding, I think many times when in a change setting, like we say, we are moving from A to B. So we will show the vision. Okay, if you go to B, it will be very good, very nice. And but then people say, no, I am satisfied here in A itself. So why should I move to B? That is a bigger challenge. So I like the framework that you were talking about, the dissatisfaction. So how do we really create that dissatisfaction, like in a school settings, like let's say a local rural school settings, the maths performance, it's very low to the national or state average of one particular topic. So so how do we create that dissatisfaction in that context, like
So
in the
that's
local?
a fantastic question, right? And you'll find that many organizations that work in the preschool space or the early education space face this, because parents are very satisfied that this preschool is giving their child a ton of homework, and they're very satisfied that they're trying to speed up learning, even though that's not how learning works. You can amplify someone's view on a subject, you cannot accelerate learning beyond a certain point. In fact, it starts to have a negative impact on the child. So, one way that an organization, I think it was FSG, in order to create dissatisfaction, went to the parents and asked them, "Are you happy with your child's learning?" And they said, "Yes, absolutely, we're happy with it." And they said, "Oh, that's great. Can your child count?" And they said, "Of course, my child can count." And so they took out 10 sticks from their pocket and asked the child, "Can you pick up 4 out of these 10 sticks?" And the child went to the sticks and said, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And the parent said, "No, pick up four sticks," right? And the child again repeated this counting of the 10 sticks. And they were able to use this example to explain to parents that what they thought was the ability to count in their child was actually the rote learning of a set of numbers to a stimulus of objects placed in front of them. Right? And it becomes very important for the communities that you're working with to see this, right? And to realize it. Otherwise, you're going to face tremendous resistance. I, in fact, worked with an organization that was building a dam in a forest for tribals, and they started to dig trench pits in the forest so that the velocity of water was slowed down before it reached the dam. And the tribal community said, "What are you all doing in the forest? It's been 6 months and we haven't seen any dam. Are you taking resources from the forest, right?" And they were completely justified in feeling this fear because of the way that they had been treated for centuries and the way that they had been looted, right? So this doesn't mean that you ignore their concern, right? But you address it. And they tried to explain how the trench pits would slow down the water, and the community said, "Build us a dam. That's what you came here for." And so they said, okay, and they built a dam, and they allowed the dam to fill up with silt without the water slowing down. And they let the community experience that and actually understand or get a shared experience in this particular project. But henceforth, they never had to repeat that because this community became evangelists for them. So whenever they went to another community, they took some of them with them, right? So
Mm.
sometimes you have to allow for things to go wrong with the
Mm.
community to experience it, right?
Mm.
And the second part of this is, if we cannot create dissatisfaction, right, then
Mm.
maybe we're pushing something that doesn't really need to be there in the
Mm.
first place. And an
Mm.
example is, while working with children of a school in the same tribal community,
Mm.
um, we decided that we would try to improve the school to teach in the local language completely on our own, without speaking to the community, without getting the inputs on this. And when we went there, the children, the teachers, and everyone was saying, no, teach in English. And we were trying to create dissatisfaction for schools to be taught in English, right? But they did not budge. They continued to say, no, teach in English. And we explained, see, learning English is a long process. First, your teachers would have to learn English. Then that would take a lot of time. Then they would have to figure out how to teach in it. Okay, or we could start this parallel learning process, but it's going to be complicated. And they stuck to their guns. So we gave the children a small project, and we said, can you convince us why the language needs to be switched to English? Right? And it'll be a nice thought experiment. We'll probably learn something. And one of the children came back with a packet of fertilizer and showed us the ingredients on the back, and the ingredients were written in English. And
Mm.
he told us that whether his family pays for organic fertilizer, they don't know whether what they're getting is organic or not. And we realized in that moment that this is not our decision to make. This is the community's decision. We will present the facts to them, but it is something that they need to decide for themselves, right? And yeah, those are just two ways in which I can think about your question.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Jonathan. I really enjoy. It was a wonderful, session, and so I know you have a book that you have written. You want to share. I think you can share briefly. Maybe take 1 or 2 minutes to briefly share about the.
Oh, thanks for that.
Yeah.
So, over the past 2 years, we two colleagues, Linda, Nathan, Gustavo, Rojas, and I have been working on a book called Designing Democratic Schools and Learning Experiences: A Global Perspective. And the book recently got published and is available open access. Perhaps the link can be shared in the YouTube chat, but or on the YouTube description. But what this book explores is 38 case studies of schools from 14 different countries, and how they've been able to create democratic learning environments irrespective of the conditions in which they are. Right? Even though things are complicated, and even though it's a little more messy and less straightforward, what have they done that really, really works? And it also helps us broaden the definition of what a democratic school is, right? What comes to mind is total autonomy, where everyone makes their own decisions and we don't know whether learning's happening or not, but that's not the case, right? So you'll find schools that provide tremendous autonomy, and you'll find schools that do facilitate and encourage choice within very important structures that need to exist in the education space.
Yeah, if you can link, you can put it in the YouTube chat later, for the open books. And I think I have one more question. I think maybe I will put, then we will stop the session.
Oh, sure.
Ram, can you show that question from Lakshmi?
Yeah, I've put in the link to the book in the chat. It's available for free since it's open access, and I think has already been accessed over 65,000 times. Okay, so we have a question from Lakshmi saying she came across a framework where there are three kinds of scale. One is scaling in depth, the other is scaling up, and the questions disappeared from the screen. Are you able to see it, Vijay?
Yes, actually, it's in the front. So Okay, so scale deeper, one context deeper, then scale up advocacy and scale across number. So then I think she's continuing with this question. Yeah.
Oh, sure. So, Lakshmi's question is that there's a framework that talks about scaling deeper or scaling up through advocacy, and scaling across in terms of, I guess, breadth. And how does this work with different organizations? So, like I spoke about earlier, it totally depends on the type of product or service that you have, right? Let's say an organization that works with a school and slowly starts understanding that that school in rural India is not going to see much change unless we get certain other aspects also sorted, like drinking water in the area. And then they start working on water and they start building the entire ecosystem for the village. Farmers start doing better, they get more disposable income, can actually pay the fees in the school starts improving. And you'll notice that the Gandhi Fellowship has evolved into this model, right? From going directly to schools to now working on the entirety of rural development. And that is a perspective, right? And finally, then you have other organizations like Barefoot, for instance, which worked on implementation to a certain extent, and then moved to advocacy to scale up some of the learnings from here. And you then have organizations that keep going more and more into depth to produce specialized content. Like one is Center for Learning Resources in Pune that developed a lot of resources for early learning, or you'd have people that do RCTs or in-depth studies. And it all depends on what are you trying to do as an organization, what motivates you to be in the space. Right? So if working in depth motivates you and your organization and the kind of people that you've brought in, then that's what you should do. I do feel though that there is some responsibility to scale impact just being in a place like India with so many children, but that pressure need not come on you. So I would say that if you are an organization that likes to work at breadth, right, or work in depth, right, the least that you can do is share your learnings with the rest of the sector, right, and let the sector do whatever they want with those learnings. But that's the least, according to me, that you should do. But alternatively, if you are a think tank, if you are a research organization, if you are someone who thrives specifically about studying something, then you should study that in depth or put it out, right? But yeah, I would just start with what motivates you. And you have built a team based on certain values and certain kinds of people. So, what motivates them? And at the end of the day, are you having the impact that you set out to have? But do not feel any pressure to move from one to the other if it does not motivate you.
Great. I know there are other two more questions, but because of the time, we need to honor the time. But maybe you can answer that questions in the chat as well. So I just want to conclude once again. Wants to thank you, Jonathan, for taking this time. And few announcement on July 25th, we have an in focus interview. So please tune the upcoming event of EdTech Society and also the T4E 2024 conference. The abstract deadline is July 23rd. So it's going to be in IIT Gandhinagar this time in December. So mark your calendar, and the abstract deadline is July 23rd. So please do submit your abstract, and you can find more details in the chat. We have put the conference call for proposal, link in the chat, and also we will put Jonathan's book as well. The link in the comment section, it will be there. Those who are interested, please do find. And once again, I want to thank you, all the team who worked behind the scene, especially Ram. So Ram was working as a technical, support member for this event, and also Lakshmi and Dr. Sarika Chauhan for as a program committee chair. There are several website, Vivek creating the website link, for this registration, and the StreamYard link for Salim, And we thank you all of you for your volunteers support for this event. Once again, thank you all. So please tune for the next event on July 25th. Thank you. Bye.